My daughter had a child with my husband. Words I never imagined I'd speak aloud, let alone live through. I still wake up some mornings wondering if it was all just a terrible nightmare. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, type 1 in the comments. And please, leave a like and subscribe. Let's show that we're strong together. My name is Diane Peterson. I'm 67 years old, and until this year, I thought I knew exactly who I was. A devoted wife to Michael for 42 years, a loving mother to our daughter Emily, and a woman who believed that family meant everything. I lived in our 3-bedroom colonial house in suburban Chicago, the same house where we'd raised Emily, where every room held memories of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and quiet Sunday dinners around our oak dining table. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in March. I remember the exact date, March 15th, because it's burned into my memory like a brand. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the breakfast dishes in my favorite yellow ceramic bowl, the one Emily had made for me in her high school pottery class. The morning sun streamed through the gingham curtains I'd sewn myself 20 years ago, casting dancing shadows across the linoleum floor that Michael always promised to replace, but never did. I was wearing my everyday uniform, a soft lavender cardigan that had seen better days, comfortable jeans with a small paint stain on the knee from when I'd helped Emily paint her college dorm room, and the pearl earrings Michael had given me for our 20th anniversary. My wedding ring, a simple gold band that had grown loose over the years, caught the light as I scrubbed at a stubborn egg stain on Michael's favorite coffee mug. The house felt different that morning, though I couldn't pinpoint why. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that made my shoulders ache even though I'd slept well. Emily had been staying with us for 3 months now, ever since her divorce from David had been finalized. She'd said she needed time to figure things out, to heal, to be around family who loved her. And of course, Michael and I had welcomed her with open arms. What parents wouldn't? But lately, something had shifted. Emily, who used to chatter endlessly about her day, her job at the marketing firm downtown, her plans for the future, had become quiet, secretive even. She'd take phone calls in her old bedroom with the door closed, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly when I walked past. Michael, too, seemed distracted, distant in a way that felt foreign after 4 decades of marriage. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was just feeling the strain of having an extra person in the house, even though that person was my own daughter. Maybe it was my age, my hormones, the way women my age sometimes became paranoid or overly sensitive. Dr. Harrison had mentioned during my last checkup that stress could manifest in unexpected ways. I was drying the yellow bowl with a dishcloth that smelled faintly of lavender fabric softener when I heard Emily's car pull into the driveway. She was supposed to be at work, had left that morning in her navy business suit, kissing my cheek and promising to pick up groceries on her way home. But here she was, returning at 10:30 in the morning. Through the kitchen window, I watched her sit in her silver Honda Civic for several minutes, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her head tilted back against the headrest. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she seemed to be gathering courage for something. When she finally got out of the car, she moved differently, carefully, protectively, as if she were carrying something precious. The front door opened and closed with unusual quietness. Emily always announced her arrival with a cheerful, "Mom, I'm home," or "Anyone here?" But this time, there was only the soft click of the lock, the whisper of her heels on the hardwood floor of the entryway. "Emily," I called out, setting down the dish towel and walking toward the living room. "Honey, you're home early. Is everything okay?" What I found when I rounded the corner into our living room will haunt me for the rest of my life. Emily was sitting on our cream-colored sofa, the one we'd saved for months to buy when we first moved into this house, holding a baby, a tiny infant, no more than a few weeks old, wrapped in a soft blue blanket I'd never seen before. The baby's face was peaceful, eyes closed, one tiny fist curled against Emily's chest. For a moment, my brain simply couldn't process what I was seeing. Emily holding a baby made no sense. She wasn't pregnant. She hadn't been pregnant. She would have told me. Wouldn't she? "Emily?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Whose baby is that?" She looked up at me then, and the expression on her face was unlike anything I'd ever seen from my daughter. There was no joy, no maternal glow, no excitement about introducing me to this beautiful child. Instead, there was something that looked almost like guilt. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice steady but strained. "We need to talk." The baby stirred in her arms, making a soft mewing sound that tugged at something deep in my chest. I'd always imagined that the next baby I'd hold would be my grandchild, that Emily would call me with excitement when she found out she was pregnant, that I'd be there for doctor's appointments and baby showers and those precious first moments in the hospital. I couldn't finish the sentence. My legs felt unsteady, and I gripped the back of the armchair for support. "Mom, sit down," Emily said, and there was something in her tone that made my blood run cold. It was the voice she'd used as a teenager when she'd been caught in a lie, when she was about to confess to something she knew would hurt me. I remained standing, my knuckles white against the fabric of the chair. The living room around us, with its family photos on the mantel, the Afghan my mother had crocheted draped over the back of the couch, the coffee table books about gardening and travel destinations we'd always planned to visit, suddenly felt like a stage set for a play I didn't understand. "Where did this baby come from, Emily?" I asked, my voice stronger now, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. She looked down at the infant in her arms, stroking one finger gently across the downy hair on its head. "Mom, I know this is going to be hard to understand. Just tell me." The words came out sharper than I intended, and the baby startled slightly at the sound. Emily took a deep breath, the kind people take before diving into cold water. "This is Michael Jr.," she said softly. He's my son." The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael Jr., named after my husband. Named after Emily's stepfather, the man who had raised her since she was 7 years old, who had walked her down the aisle at her wedding, who had been the only father she'd really known. "But Emily, you weren't pregnant," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "You've been living here for 3 months. You've been going to work every day. I had him 6 weeks ago," she interrupted, still not looking at me. "I've been staying somewhere else sometimes, during the nights, taking care of him. 6 weeks ago." I thought back to that time, trying to remember if Emily had seemed different, if there had been signs I'd missed. There had been evenings when she'd said she was staying late at the office, weekends when she'd claimed to be visiting friends. I'd been proud of her for staying busy, for not wallowing in her divorce, for rebuilding her social life. I'd been such a fool. "Where?" I asked. "Where have you been staying?" Emily finally looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw the truth before she spoke it. I saw the apology, the defiance, the terrible knowledge of what she was about to destroy. "With Michael," she whispered. The world tilted sideways. The familiar living room with its butter-yellow walls and family photographs became foreign and threatening. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the blood draining from my face. "With Michael," I repeated slowly. "With my husband." "Mom?" "With my husband," I said again, louder this time. The baby began to cry, a thin wailing that seemed to pierce straight through my chest. Emily stood up, bouncing slightly to soothe the infant. "Mom, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" The words exploded out of me. Explain how my daughter and my husband— I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't give voice to the unthinkable thing that was happening in my living room. The front door opened at that moment, and Michael walked in, his gray hair slightly disheveled, his blue work shirt wrinkled. He stopped short when he saw us, his face going pale. "Diane," he said quietly, "you're home early." And in that moment, looking at my husband of 42 years, seeing the guilt written across his familiar features, I knew that my life as I'd known it was over. The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm. Michael stood frozen in the doorway, his work boots still muddy from the construction site, his eyes darting between Emily holding the baby and my face, which must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. Because in a way I had. The ghost of the woman I thought I was. The mother and wife who believed her family loved her. "How long?" The words came out as a croak. My throat felt like sandpaper, dry and raw. "How long has this been going on?" Michael stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate care, as if sudden movements might shatter what little remained of our family. He looked older than his 69 years in that moment, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what he was about to confess. "Diane, please sit down," he said, his voice gentle in that patronizing way he'd adopted over the past few years. The tone he used when he thought I was being dramatic or emotional. "Don't!" I held up my hand, surprised by how steady it looked when everything inside me was shaking. "Don't you dare use that voice with me. Not now. How long?" Emily shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting his back with practiced movements that spoke of weeks, maybe months, of experience. "Mom, it started after the divorce papers were final. I was so lost, so broken. And Michael, he was there for me. He was there for you?" I laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter, a sound I'd never heard from my own mouth. "He was there for you in what way exactly?" The baby's cries had subsided to soft whimpers, and Emily rocked gently from side to side, a motion that looked so natural, so maternal, that it made my chest ache. This should have been a moment of joy, my first grandchild. Instead, it felt like watching my family implode in slow motion. Michael ran his hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I'd seen thousands of times over 4 decades of marriage. Usually, it preceded an apology for forgetting to take out the trash or coming home late from work. Now, it preceded the destruction of everything I'd built my life around. "It wasn't planned, Diane," he said quietly. "Emily was hurting and I was lonely. Lonely. The word hit me like a slap. Lonely? You were lonely? I thought about all the evenings I'd spent making his favorite meals. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, meatloaf with the special glaze his mother had taught me to make before she died. I thought about the countless loads of his laundry I'd folded, the way I'd iron his work shirts every Sunday night, so he'd look professional at the construction company where he supervised a crew of younger men who still saw him as capable, vital. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake when his back was hurting, massaging his shoulders with the menthol cream that made my hands smell like medicine for hours afterward. The mornings I'd gotten up early to make his coffee just the way he liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, and pack his lunch in the same blue cooler he'd been carrying for 15 years. "I've been here, Michael," I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. "I've been here every single day for 42 years. I've cooked your meals, washed your clothes, listened to your complaints about work, about your boss, about your aching joints. I've been here when you had pneumonia last winter, sleeping in the chair next to your side of the bed so I could check on you every few hours. I've been here." Emily flinched at my tone, and the baby started crying again, a thin wail that seemed to underscore the chaos unfolding in my living room. My living room with the furniture I'd chosen, the curtains I'd sewn, the family photos I'd arranged and rearranged over the years as our faces aged and changed. "Mom, please," Emily said, her voice thick with tears. "It wasn't about you. It was never about you. It was never about me." I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd carried for 9 months, who I'd raised through scraped knees and broken hearts, through high school drama and college anxiety. My husband and my daughter had an affair and it was never about me? The word affair hung in the air like a curse. None of us had said it out loud until now, but there it was, ugly and undeniable. I remembered Emily as a little girl, 7 years old when Michael and I got married, how she'd clung to my hand during the ceremony and whispered, "Now we're a real family, Mommy." I remembered teaching her to braid her hair, helping her with homework at this very coffee table, holding her when her first boyfriend broke her heart in 10th grade. I remembered Michael promising me, on our wedding day, that he would love and cherish me, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. I'd believed him. God help me, I'd believed every word. "When did it start?" I asked again, but this time my voice was barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but I needed to understand the scope of my betrayal, the timeline of my humiliation. Michael and Emily exchanged a look, a quick, intimate glance that spoke of shared secrets and conspiracy. It was a look that excluded me completely, and seeing it felt like being punched in the stomach. 6 months ago, Michael said finally, right after Emily's divorce was finalized. 6 months. I counted backward in my mind, remembering. Emily's divorce had been brutal. David had cheated on her with his secretary. A cliché so predictable it would have been funny if it hadn't destroyed my daughter's marriage. Emily had been devastated, sobbing in my arms like she was 12 years old again, asking how men could be so cruel, so selfish. I'd comforted her. I'd made her tea and listened to her cry and assured her that not all men were like David, that she would find someone who would love and respect her the way she deserved. And all the while, apparently, she was planning to seduce my husband. "You came to me," I said to Emily, my voice breaking. "You came to me crying about David's betrayal. You said you didn't understand how someone could do that to a person they claimed to love." Emily's face crumpled, but she didn't deny it. The baby had settled again, making soft sucking motions against her shoulder, oblivious to the family disintegrating around him. "I remember that night," I continued, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. "It was in September. You'd been drinking wine, too much wine, and you were sitting right there on that couch, telling me how much it hurt to discover that your husband had been lying to you for months. Do you remember what you said to me?" Emily closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You said, 'How could he do this to me, Mom? How could he pretend to love me while he was betraying me?' Those were your exact words." My voice was getting stronger now, fueled by the righteous anger that was building in my chest. "And I held you. I made you soup and tucked you into your old bed and promised you that you were safe here, that this was your home, that your family would never hurt you the way David did." "Mom, I was so proud of you for leaving him," I continued, the words pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. "So proud that my daughter had enough self-respect to walk away from a man who didn't value her. I bragged about you to my friends, to the ladies at church. I said, 'My Emily knows her worth. She won't tolerate being treated badly.' The irony was so bitter I could taste it. My daughter, who had been so outraged by her husband's infidelity, had turned around and seduced mine. My husband, who had held me while I cried over Emily's pain, who had said David was a fool for throwing away a woman like Emily, had been planning his own betrayal. Was I used? The question came out before I could stop it, and both Michael and Emily flinched as if I'd screamed. "All those years, was I just useful to you?" I thought about our wedding day, how Michael had promised to be faithful to me. I thought about the early years of our marriage, when money was tight and we'd scrimp and save together, dreaming of the house we'd eventually buy, the life we'd build. I thought about supporting him when he started his construction business, working double shifts at the department store to help with expenses, never complaining when he came home exhausted and covered in sawdust. I thought about Emily's childhood, all the sacrifices I'd made to be the mother she needed, the job opportunities I'd passed up because I wanted to be home when she got off the school bus, the girls' trips I'd declined because the money needed to go toward Emily's college fund, the dreams I'd deferred, the ambitions I'd set aside, all in service of building a family that loved and supported each other. "I gave you everything," I said, looking between them. "Everything I had, everything I was, I gave to this family. And this is what you do with it?" The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows now, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors I'd mopped countless times, highlighting the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny accusations. This house, this life, everything I'd thought was solid and permanent, suddenly felt as fragile as those specks of dust, ready to be blown away by the slightest wind. Michael took a step toward me, his hand outstretched as if he wanted to touch me, to comfort me. "Diane, it doesn't have to change everything between us. We can work through this." "Work through this?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You had a baby with my daughter, and you think we can work through this?" "People make mistakes," he said, and the casual way he said it, as if this was just another of his minor infractions that I was expected to forgive and forget, sent a white-hot rage through my veins. "A mistake?" My voice rose to a shout. "A mistake? You don't accidentally have an affair with your stepdaughter, Michael. You don't accidentally get her pregnant. You don't accidentally lie to me for 6 months." The baby started crying again, loudly this time, and Emily stood up, bouncing him frantically. "Mom, you're scaring him." "I'm scaring him?" I laughed again, that same harsh sound. "I'm scaring him." What about what you've done to me? What about how terrified I am right now, finding out that my entire life has been a lie? But as I looked at the baby, this innocent child who bore my husband's name, but would never be the grandchild I'd dreamed of, something shifted inside me. This wasn't his fault. None of this was his fault. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down, trying to think clearly through the fog of betrayal and rage. I need you both to leave, I said quietly. Diane, Michael started. No, I held up my hand again. I need you to pack your things and leave. Both of you. I need time to think, and I can't do that with you here. Emily clutched the baby tighter, her face pale. Mom, where are we supposed to go? The question almost broke me. Even now, even after what they'd done, Emily was still looking to me to solve her problems, to take care of her. And despite everything, my first instinct was to comfort her, to assure her that I would figure something out, that I would make it okay, but I couldn't. Not this time. That's not my problem anymore, I said, the words tasting foreign in my mouth, and for the first time in my adult life, I turned my back on my family and walked away. They didn't leave. I should have known they wouldn't. After 42 years of marriage, I knew Michael well enough to predict his next move. He was stubborn, set in his ways, and he'd convinced himself that if he just gave me time to cool off, I'd come around. I'd forgive him, like I always did, like I had when he forgot our anniversary 3 years running, like I had when he spent our vacation fund on a new truck without consulting me, like I had when he made jokes about my cooking in front of his work buddies, laughing at my expense while I served them beer and pretzels in my own living room. The next morning, I woke up in the guest bedroom. In my own house, I'd been relegated to the guest bedroom, to the sound of the baby crying. It was 5:30 a.m., and through the thin walls I could hear Emily's voice, soft and cooing, trying to soothe little Michael Jr. The sound should have warmed my heart. Instead, it felt like needles under my skin. I lay there in the narrow single bed, staring at the ceiling I'd painted myself 2 summers ago in a cheerful butter yellow, listening to the sounds of a family that no longer included me. Emily's gentle humming, Michael's heavy footsteps in the hallway, the coffee maker gurgling to life in the kitchen. My kitchen, where I'd made coffee for my husband every morning for over 4 decades. When I finally got dressed and went downstairs, I found them at my dining table like some twisted parody of a normal family. Emily was feeding the baby with a bottle. Michael was reading the Chicago Tribune and eating toast from my favorite china, the Spode Christmas pattern his mother had given us as a wedding gift. The dishes I only used for special occasions. They looked up when I entered, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emily offered me a tentative smile, as if this was just another ordinary morning, as if she hadn't shattered my world less than 24 hours ago. "Good morning, Mom," she said softly. "I made coffee. Your favorite, the French roast from that little shop on Michigan Avenue. My favorite." She'd made my favorite coffee. The gesture was so normal, so thoughtful, so completely inappropriate given the circumstances that I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat that came out more like a sob. "Why are you still here?" I asked, my voice hoarse from a night of crying into my pillow. Michael folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, the same way he'd done every morning for decades. "We live here, Diane. This is our home. Our home." As if nothing had changed. As if the revelation of their affair was just a minor inconvenience to be smoothed over with time and routine. "This is my home," I said, gripping the doorframe for support. "My name is on the deed. I've been paying the mortgage for 42 years. "Technically," Michael said, his voice taking on that condescending tone that made my teeth clench. "Both our names are on the deed, and I've been contributing to the mortgage payments too." Contributing. As if his occasional checks when his construction business was doing well were equivalent to my steady, reliable income from the department store where I'd worked for 30 years. As if his sporadic contributions gave him equal claim to the home I'd turned into a sanctuary for our family. Emily shifted uncomfortably, bouncing the baby gently. "Maybe we could all just take some time to figure things out. As a family? We're not a family," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "Families don't do this to each other." "Mom, please." Emily's voice cracked. "Can't we just try to work through this? For the baby's sake? For the baby's sake." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. She was using her infant, their infant, as leverage, counting on my maternal instincts to override my sense of self-preservation. And the terrible thing was, it almost worked. Looking at that tiny, innocent face, I felt my resolve wavering. He didn't ask to be born into this nightmare. He didn't deserve to suffer because of his parents' choices. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend this was normal, that we could all just live together like some grotesque modern family while my heart bled out all over the kitchen floor. I can't, I whispered. I can't do this. I turned and walked out of my own kitchen, out of my own house, and got in my car. I drove aimlessly through the Chicago suburbs, past strip malls and coffee shops and other people's lives, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of awkward encounters and carefully avoided conversations. Michael and Emily established their own routine, moving around the house like they owned it. Which I suppose they did, at least partially. Emily had taken over the master bedroom, our bedroom, mine and Michael's, claiming she needed the space for the baby's crib and changing table. Michael had moved his things into Emily's old room, down the hall. I remained in the guest bedroom, a stranger in my own home, listening to their lives unfold around me like I was invisible. They were so careful to be polite, so determinedly normal. Emily would ask if I needed anything from the grocery store when she went shopping. Michael would offer to fix the leaky faucet in my bathroom that had been dripping for months. They included me in conversations about mundane household matters, the utility bills, the lawn care, whether we needed to call someone about the strange noise the furnace was making. But they never talked about what had happened. They never acknowledged the elephant in the room, the baby elephant that cried at 3 a.m. and reminded me every waking moment that my family had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Each small kindness felt like mockery. Each attempt at normalcy was another reminder that they expected me to just accept this new reality, to adapt to the family structure they'd created without my consent or input. The morning I found Emily doing laundry, my laundry, mixed in with hers and the baby's clothes, was the morning I realized they weren't just staying temporarily. They were moving in permanently, taking over, erasing me slowly, methodically, with smiles and politeness and the quiet assumption that I would eventually just give up and accept my new role as the unwanted third wheel in my own life. I stood in the laundry room doorway, watching my daughter fold my intimate garments with casual familiarity, and something inside me finally snapped. "What are you doing?" My voice came out deadly quiet. Emily looked up, startled. She was holding one of my brassieres, a plain, practical white cotton one that I'd owned for years. And for some reason, seeing her hands on my undergarments felt like the final violation. "I was just helping with the laundry," she said, her voice defensive. "I had a load of baby clothes, and there was room, so I threw in some of your things too." "Don't." I snatched the bra from her hands. "Don't touch my things." "Mom, I was trying to be helpful. Stop calling me that." The words erupted from somewhere deep in my chest. "Stop calling me Mom. You lost the right to call me that when you started sleeping with my husband." Emily's face went pale, and her hands trembled as she clutched a tiny onesie, blue, with a pattern of teddy bears. "You don't mean that." "I do mean it." I gathered up the rest of my clothes from the laundry basket, my movements sharp and jerky. "I mean every word." She started crying then, soft, pitiful tears that once would have broken my heart. "I'm still your daughter. No matter what happened, I'm still your daughter." "Are you?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the revelation, because my daughter would never have done this to me. My daughter loved me. My daughter would have protected me, not destroyed me. "I do love you," she sobbed. "I've always loved you. You have a funny way of showing it." I left her there in the laundry room crying over the baby clothes and went upstairs to pack. Not everything. I couldn't take everything without a plan, without somewhere to go. But enough. Enough to survive for a few days while I figured out my next move. The suitcase I pulled from the closet was the same one I'd used for our honeymoon 42 years ago. A cheap navy blue case with a broken wheel and a zipper that stuck. I'd carried it to Niagara Falls, where Michael and I had spent 3 days in a motel room with thin walls and a view of the parking lot, planning our future together. Now I was packing it to escape the future we'd built. I chose my clothes carefully. Practical items, comfortable shoes, the few pieces of jewelry that held sentimental value. My mother's wedding ring, which I wore on my right hand. The pearl necklace my father had given me for my high school graduation. The small gold cross I'd received for my confirmation. A lifetime ago, when I still believed that good things happened to good people. At the bottom of my jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper, I found the letter my mother had written me the night before my wedding. I'd forgotten it was there, had probably forgotten it existed, but seeing her familiar handwriting, the way she'd shaped her letters with such careful precision, brought a flood of memories rushing back. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands and read her words. My dearest Diane, tomorrow you begin a new chapter of your life. Marriage is a beautiful thing, but it's also a challenge that will test you in ways you can't imagine. There will be times when you want to give up, when the man you marry disappoints you or hurts you or makes you question your worth. In those moments, I want you to remember this. You are valuable not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are. Don't lose yourself in the service of love. Don't give so much of yourself away that there's nothing left for you. Hold on to yourself, Diane, even if no one else does. Love, Mother. I read the letter 3 times, my mother's voice echoing in my memory. She'd been dead for 15 years, but her words felt like a message from beyond, a reminder of who I was before I became Mrs. Michael Peterson, before I became Emily's mother, before I became the woman who defined herself entirely through her relationships with other people. Hold on to yourself, Diane, even if no one else does. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my purse, next to my car keys and the small amount of cash I kept for emergencies. Then I picked up my suitcase, took one last look at the guest bedroom that had become my prison, and walked downstairs. Michael was in the living room, holding the baby while Emily showered. He looked up when I appeared with my luggage, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I can't stay here." "Diane, don't be dramatic. We can work this out." Dramatic. 42 years of marriage, and he thought my reaction to his affair with my daughter was dramatic. "You know what's dramatic, Michael?" I set down my suitcase and looked him straight in the eye. "What's dramatic is finding out that your husband and daughter have been lying to you for 6 months. What's dramatic is discovering that you've been living with strangers who look like your family, but treat you like an inconvenience." The baby started fussing, and Michael automatically began the gentle swaying motion that Emily had mastered, the dance of new parenthood that should have filled me with joy, but instead felt like watching my replacement being groomed. "This is your home," he said quietly. "We're your family." "No," I said, picking up my suitcase again. "This is your house now, and that's your family." I gestured toward the ceiling, where the sound of running water indicated Emily was still in the shower. "I hope you're happy together." And with that, I walked out of the house I'd called home for over 20 years, got in my car, and drove away from the only life I'd ever known. I drove for 2 hours before I realized I had nowhere to go. The reality hit me as I sat in the parking lot of a Denny's restaurant on the outskirts of Naperville, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I had left my home, my life, everything I'd known for over 4 decades, and I had no plan, no destination, no friend's couch to crash on, no family member to call. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. I had built my entire social world around Michael and Emily. My friendships were couple friends, people we saw at barbecues and holiday parties, women whose husbands worked with Michael, neighbors who knew me as Mrs. Peterson rather than Diane. I couldn't imagine calling any of them to explain that I needed a place to stay because my husband and daughter were having an affair and had a baby together. I checked into a Motel 6 that night, paying cash for a room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and cigarette smoke that decades of non-smoking policies couldn't quite eliminate. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern that might have been cheerful once, and the carpet bore stains that told stories I didn't want to know. But it was mine for the night. A space where no one could find me, where I could fall apart in private. That's when my phone started ringing. The first call came at 9:17 p.m. Michael's name lit up the screen, and I stared at it until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the time I turned off the phone, there were 6 missed calls and a string of text messages that started apologetic and grew increasingly desperate. Diane, please come home. We need to talk. This is ridiculous. You're being childish. Emily is crying. You're upsetting everyone. Where are you? I'm worried about you. Answer your phone. Now. The progression from pleading to demanding was so typically Michael that I almost laughed. Almost. Nothing had changed. Even now, even after everything, he expected me to prioritize his comfort over my own pain. I turned the phone back on long enough to listen to the voicemails, masochistically curious about what he had to say for himself. The first message was contrite. Diane, honey, I know you're upset, but running away isn't going to solve anything. Come home so we can talk this through like adults. The second was irritated. Diane, this is getting out of hand. You can't just disappear because you're having a tantrum. We have responsibilities here. The third was angry. Where the hell are you? Emily is beside herself. The baby won't stop crying, and I have to work tomorrow. Stop being selfish and come home. Selfish. The word echoed in the cramped motel room. I was being selfish for not wanting to live with my husband's mistress and their illegitimate child. I was being selfish for prioritizing my own emotional well-being over their convenience. The fourth message was Emily's voice, thick with tears. Mom, please come home. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but please don't leave me. I need you. The baby needs you. You're his grandmother, Mom. You're the only grandmother he has. Even in her desperation, Emily knew exactly which buttons to push. The baby needs you. You're his grandmother. She was weaponizing my maternal instincts, counting on my inability to abandon a child, even one born from the ashes of my marriage. The fifth message was Michael again, and his tone had shifted to something that made my skin crawl. Diane, I've been thinking about what you said, and maybe you're right. Maybe we do need some time apart. But if you don't come back, I'm going to have to make some difficult decisions about the house, about our finances. I don't want to hurt you, but I have to think about Emily and the baby now. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Come back and accept this situation, or I'll make sure you have nothing left to come back to. The sixth message was the most revealing. Diane, listen to me. I know this is hard, but you need to understand something. Emily and this isn't going away. We're together now. We're a family. You can be part of this family or you can be alone, but you can't break us up. So stop trying. I played that last message 3 times, each repetition revealing new layers of cruelty I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't promising to change. He was telling me that I could accept my new role as the third wheel in their relationship, or I could be cut out entirely. I cried myself to sleep on those scratchy motel sheets, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that left me exhausted and hollow. The next morning brought a new wave of contact. But this time, it wasn't just Michael and Emily. Somehow, word had gotten out, and my phone buzzed with messages from people I'd barely spoken to in years. Michael's sister, Carol, who lived in Phoenix and called me maybe twice a year, had left a voicemail that dripped with false concern. Diane, honey, Michael told me what happened. I know you're upset, but you need to think about this rationally. Emily is going through a difficult time with her divorce, and sometimes people make mistakes when they're vulnerable. Don't throw away 42 years of marriage over one mistake. One mistake. As if the 6-month affair that resulted in a baby was equivalent to forgetting to pick up milk from the store. Emily's friend Sarah had somehow gotten my number and left a message that made my blood boil. Mrs. Peterson, I hope you don't mind me calling, but Emily is devastated. She's always looked up to you so much, and she's heartbroken that you're rejecting her when she needs you most. I know this situation is unconventional, but Emily and Michael are really happy together, and the baby is beautiful. Maybe you could find it in your heart to be happy for them. Happy for them. Happy that my daughter had stolen my husband. Happy that they'd created a child while systematically lying to me for half a year. But the call that broke me came at 11:30 a.m., and it was from my 8-year-old grandson, Tyler, Emily's son from her marriage to David. Grandma Diane? His little voice was confused and scared. Mommy is crying a lot, and Uncle Michael won't tell me where you went. Did I do something wrong? Are you not going to come to my baseball game on Saturday? Tyler, my sweet, innocent grandson who had nothing to do with any of this, who called Michael Uncle Michael, because that's how I'd introduced him when Emily married David. Tyler, who still believed that families stayed together, that grown-ups kept their promises, that grandmothers didn't just disappear. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered into the phone, my voice breaking. You didn't do anything wrong. Grandma just needs some time to think about some grown-up things. But you're still my grandma, right? He asked, and the uncertainty in his voice shattered what was left of my heart. Yes, baby, I'm still your grandma. I will always be your grandma. Then why can't you come home? Mommy says you don't want to live with us anymore. I closed my eyes, hating Emily for putting Tyler in the middle of this, for using his confusion and fear as another weapon against me. It's complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that are hard to fix. Like when Mommy and Daddy got divorced. The parallel was too painful to acknowledge directly. Something like that. I don't want you to get divorced from us too, Tyler said, and started crying. I spent 20 minutes trying to comfort him, promising him that I loved him, that what was happening between the adults didn't change how I felt about him, that I would see him soon. But even as I said the words, I wondered how I could keep those promises. How could I maintain a relationship with Tyler when it meant accepting Emily and Michael's relationship? How could I be in the same room with them without losing my mind? After Tyler's call, I sat in that depressing motel room and seriously considered going back. Not because I forgave them, not because I accepted what they'd done, but because the alternative, a life without my grandson, without any family at all, seemed unbearable. That's when the next call came, and this one surprised me. Mrs. Peterson, this is Janet Walsh from next door. Janet was in her 70s, a widow who had lived next to us for 15 years. We had the kind of neighborly relationship that consisted of borrowed cups of sugar and polite conversations over the fence about the weather and property values. I couldn't remember ever having a personal conversation with her. Janet, hi. How did you get my number? From the phone book, dear. Listen, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted you to know that if you need anything at all, I'm here. That's very kind of you, but I saw what happened yesterday. She interrupted gently. I saw you leave with your suitcase, and I want you to know that what I've been watching over the past few months, well, let's just say I'm not surprised you left. What do you mean? Janet was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. I've seen things, dear. Late nights when Emily's car was in your driveway but yours wasn't. Times when I've seen Michael and Emily together in ways that, well, that didn't seem right for a stepfather and daughter. She had known. My neighbor had figured out what was happening before I did. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. What was I supposed to say? Excuse me, Mrs. Peterson, but I think your husband is having an affair with your daughter? You would have thought I was a crazy old woman stirring up trouble. She was right. I would have been offended, defensive. I would have protected them from her accusations. But I want you to know, Janet continued, that you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. What they did to you is unforgivable, and anyone with half a brain can see that. It was the first validation I'd received from anyone, the first acknowledgement that I wasn't being dramatic or unreasonable, that what had happened to me was actually as terrible as it felt. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. You listened to me, Diane Peterson. I've been watching you for 15 years. And you are a good woman. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people, and now it's time for you to take care of yourself. Don't let them guilt you into going back. Don't let them convince you that this is normal or acceptable or that you should just get over it for the sake of keeping the peace. After Janet hung up, I sat in that motel room feeling something I hadn't felt since discovering the truth about Michael and Emily. Clarity. They would keep calling. They would keep trying to manipulate me into returning, into accepting their version of normal, into playing the role of the understanding wife and mother who put everyone else's happiness before her own dignity. But I didn't have to go back. For the first time in my adult life, I could choose myself. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I had no idea what choosing myself even looked like. I'd been Mrs. Peterson for so long, I wasn't sure who Diane was without that identity. But I was about to find out. The first concrete step toward reclaiming my life came on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd discovered the truth. I was sitting in a different motel room. I'd been moving every few days, partly for the anonymity, but mostly because staying in one place made me feel trapped, vulnerable to being found and dragged back into their web of manipulation. This room was slightly better than the last one. The carpet was newer, the air conditioning worked, and someone had made an effort to make it feel less institutional with a framed print of Lake Michigan on the wall. But it was still a motel room, still temporary, still a reminder that I was homeless at 67 years old because my family had decided I was disposable. I was drinking coffee from a styrofoam cup, bitter, weak coffee that bore no resemblance to the French roast Emily had been making at home, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's name, and for the first time in a week, I answered. "Diane, thank God." His voice was breathless with relief. "I've been so worried. Where are you?" "I'm safe," I said simply. "That's not what I asked. Where are you? I need to see you. We need to talk." "We are talking. In person, Diane." "This is ridiculous. You can't live in hotels forever." The assumption in his voice, that I was living in hotels because I had no other choice, that I would eventually have to come crawling back, ignited something fierce inside my chest. "Watch me," I said. "Be reasonable. You're 67 years old. You can't start over at your age. You need family. You need security." "I need family," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call what you and Emily did to me? Family? What Emily and I have doesn't diminish what you and I have built together." "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Just stop. You don't get to redefine what happened. You don't get to minimize it or explain it away or make it sound reasonable." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought he'd hung up. Then he spoke again, and his tone had shifted to something harder, more calculating. "Diane, I've been patient with you. I've tried to be understanding about your emotional reaction. But you need to face reality. The house payment is due next week. The utilities need to be paid. Emily has doctor appointments for the baby, and daycare expenses are piling up. We need your income." There it was. The real reason for his concern. Not my well-being, not our marriage, not even guilt over what he'd done. Money. They needed my paycheck from the department store. My reliable, steady income that had been supporting their lifestyle for months while they played house behind my back. "My income," I said quietly. "Our income. We're married, Diane. What's yours is mine, and what's yours is Emily's, apparently. Don't be crude." Crude. He was calling me crude for stating the obvious truth about his affair with my daughter. "Michael," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been all week. "I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." "Diane," I said, "listen." I took a deep breath, tasting the stale motel air, feeling the scratchy bedspread under my free hand. "I will not be coming home. I will not be participating in whatever twisted family arrangement you and Emily have cooked up. And I will not be paying for the privilege of being humiliated in my own house. You can't be serious." "I'm deadly serious. In fact, I'm going to the bank this afternoon to close our joint checking account." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. "You can't do that. That's our household account. Emily's been using it for baby expenses. I have automatic payments set up. Then you better figure out another way to pay for your new family," I said, "because I'm done funding it. Diane, if you do this, there's no going back. If you force me to choose between you and Emily—" "You already chose," I interrupted. 6 months ago. You chose when you started sleeping with my daughter. You chose when you got her pregnant. You chose when you decided I didn't deserve the basic respect of honesty. This isn't me forcing you to choose. This is me accepting the choice you already made." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down, but it wasn't from fear or uncertainty. It was from adrenaline, from the rush of finally standing up for myself after decades of being the accommodating wife, the understanding mother, the woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. The drive to First National Bank took 20 minutes through familiar Chicago suburbs. I'd been banking there for 35 years, had known the branch manager, Patricia Chen, since she was a young teller fresh out of college. She greeted me with the warm smile of someone who'd processed countless transactions for me over the decades. Someone who knew my routines, my habits, the rhythm of my financial life. "Mrs. Peterson, how lovely to see you. How can I help you today? I need to close my joint checking account," I said simply. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, is there a problem with the account? Something we can fix?" "No problem with the account. I just need to close it." She led me to her office, a small space with family photos on the desk and certificates on the walls that testified to her years of service. I'd been in this office before, usually with Michael, to discuss mortgages and loans and the mundane financial decisions that married couples make together. "Mrs. Peterson, if you don't mind me asking, closing a joint account usually requires both account holders to be present, or I'm divorcing my husband," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. I hadn't consciously decided to divorce Michael until that moment, but saying it out loud made it feel inevitable, right? Patricia's expression shifted to professional sympathy. "I see. I'm sorry to hear that. In cases of divorce, we generally recommend that couples work with their attorneys to determine the best way to handle joint assets. I don't have an attorney, and I don't want to wait. I want the account closed today." She pulled up my account information on her computer, and I could see her scanning the recent transaction history. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she reviewed the deposits and withdrawals from the past several months. "I see there's been quite a bit of activity on this account recently," she said carefully. "Large withdrawals, several automatic payments set up for medical expenses and daycare." Medical expenses and daycare. Michael and Emily had been using our joint account to pay for their baby's needs, spending money I'd earned to support the child that resulted from their affair. The violation felt fresh and sharp, even though I'd suspected as much. "Yes," I said. "Those expenses are no longer my responsibility." Patricia nodded, understanding more than she was saying. She'd probably seen this scenario before, wives discovering that joint accounts had been used to fund their husbands' infidelities. "I can process the closure today," she said. "The current balance will be transferred to your individual savings account." "But Mrs. Peterson, I should warn you that closing this account will immediately stop all automatic payments and deposits associated with it. If your husband has his paycheck direct deposited here, or if there are any automatic bill payments—" "That's exactly what I want," I said. Patricia worked efficiently, printing forms for me to sign, explaining the process, asking if I wanted to open a new checking account in my name only. I did. A fresh start, a clean slate, an account that only I could access or control. When it was done, when the papers were signed and the old account was officially closed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. For the first time since discovering Michael and Emily's betrayal, I had taken decisive action. I had stopped being a victim and started being an agent of my own life. The drive back to the motel took me past my old neighborhood, and on impulse I turned down Maple Street, past Janet Walsh's house, past the home where I'd lived for over 20 years. Michael's truck was in the driveway, along with Emily's car. The lawn needed mowing, I noticed. The flower beds I'd maintained so carefully looked neglected, weeds sprouting between the impatiens I'd planted last spring. As I sat there, looking at the house that no longer felt like home, my phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "What the hell did you do? The account is frozen. Emily can't buy formula for the baby." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Not my problem anymore." His response came immediately. "You're making a huge mistake. Come home and we can fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I replied. "You broke it. Now you live with the consequences." The phone rang 30 seconds later, but I didn't answer. It rang again, and again, but I'd said everything I needed to say. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept deeply. I dreamed about my mother, about the letter she'd written me before my wedding. In the dream, she was young again, sitting at our old kitchen table in the house where I'd grown up, and she was smiling at me with pride. "You remembered," she said in the dream. "You finally remembered who you are." When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the motel room windows, and for the first time in months, I felt something that might have been hope. I had a bank account with my name on it. I had a car that belonged to me. I had clothes, a phone, enough money to survive for a while. Most importantly, I had something I'd lost somewhere along the way: respect for myself. I got dressed carefully that morning, choosing a blue sweater that brought out my eyes, taking time with my hair and makeup for the first time since everything had fallen apart. In the motel bathroom mirror, I looked at myself, really looked, and saw not the broken, devastated woman who'd checked in a week ago, but someone who was beginning to remember her own worth. I had no idea what came next. I had no plan beyond surviving this day, and then the next one, and then the one after that. But for the first time since my world had imploded, I wasn't terrified of the uncertainty. I was free. The realization hit me as I stood in that cheap motel room, surrounded by the remnants of my old life and the seeds of whatever was coming next. I was free from their expectations, their manipulation, their twisted definition of family, free from Michael's condescension and Emily's tears and the baby's cries that reminded me of everything I'd lost. Free to discover who Diane Peterson was when she wasn't defined by her role as wife and mother. It was terrifying. It was also the most exciting thing that had happened to me in decades. 3 weeks had passed since I'd closed the bank account, and the silence from Michael and Emily had been deafening. No more desperate phone calls. No more manipulative text messages. No more attempts to guilt me into returning. The quiet should have been peaceful, but instead it felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. I'd moved out of the motels and into a small furnished apartment in Evanston near the lake. It was nothing special. A studio with a Murphy bed, a kitchenette, and windows that faced the parking lot instead of the water. But it was mine. My name was on the lease, my money paid the rent, and no one could take it away from me or use it as leverage to control my choices. I'd also done something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I'd hired a divorce attorney. Margaret Santos was nothing like what I'd expected. I'd imagined someone older, matronly, perhaps a woman who'd understand the particular pain of being betrayed by family. Instead, Margaret was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and direct, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Mrs. Peterson," she'd said during our first meeting, "I've seen a lot of messy divorces in my 20 years of practice, but I have to tell you, this situation is particularly complicated given that the other woman is your daughter." Hearing it stated so matter-of-factly, without euphemism or emotional padding, had been both jarring and liberating. Margaret didn't try to soften the reality or suggest that there might be a way to reconcile. She dealt in facts, and the facts were that my husband had committed adultery with my daughter, they'd had a child together, and I wanted out. "What are your goals here?" Margaret had asked, pen poised over a yellow legal pad. "What does success look like to you?" The question had stumped me. For so many years, success had meant keeping my family together, keeping everyone happy, maintaining the peace. Now that my family had imploded, I wasn't sure what I wanted beyond escape. "I want out," I'd said finally. "I want to be free of them. I want to start over." "Good?" Margaret had nodded approvingly. "Clear goals make for cleaner divorces. Now, let's talk about assets." That conversation had been enlightening and infuriating in equal measure. Despite Michael's claims that the house belonged to both of us, the truth was more complicated. We'd bought it with money from my inheritance when my parents died, and I'd been making the majority of the mortgage payments for over 20 years. My steady department store income had been the foundation of our financial stability, while Michael's construction business had been erratic at best. "We have a strong case for you retaining the house," Margaret had explained. "Your financial contributions, the inheritance, the fact that he's committed adultery. Illinois law may not recognize adultery as grounds for divorce anymore, but judges still consider it when dividing assets." The house. I'd been so focused on escaping it that I hadn't considered the possibility of reclaiming it. The idea of forcing Michael and Emily to leave, of returning to the home I'd created and maintained, felt like justice. That's what led to the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was sitting in my tiny apartment reading a novel I'd bought at a used bookstore. something I hadn't done for pleasure in years. When my phone rang, Michael's name on the caller ID no longer sent panic through my system. Instead, I felt nothing but mild curiosity about what new manipulation tactic he'd employed. "Hello, Michael." "Diane." His voice was strained, tired. "We need to talk." I thought that's what we were doing, in person. All of us. "You, me, Emily? We need to settle this." "There's nothing to settle. My attorney is handling everything." The mention of an attorney clearly caught him off guard. There was a long pause before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice had taken on the wheedling tone he used when he wanted something. "Diane, honey, you hired a lawyer? That seems so aggressive. Can't we work this out as a family?" "We're not a family anymore, Michael. You made sure of that. Look, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. What happened between Emily and me? It was a mistake. A terrible mistake that got out of hand. A mistake that got out of hand. 6 months of deception, a pregnancy, a birth, and ongoing lies, all reduced to a mistake that got out of hand. But," he continued, "we can move past this. Emily wants to apologize to you properly, face to face, and I think you should meet your grandson." There it was, the manipulation I'd been expecting. Using the baby, my supposed grandson, as bait to lure me back into their web. "He's not my grandson, Michael. He's your son. There's a difference. Diane, please, just meet with us. One conversation. If you still want to proceed with the legal action after that, I won't fight you." It was a lie, of course. Michael had never backed down from anything without a fight, but something in his voice suggested desperation, and I found myself curious about what had prompted this sudden desire for reconciliation. "Why now?" I asked. "You've left me alone for 3 weeks. What's changed?" Another pause. "Things have been difficult. Emily's struggling, the baby's been sick, and the financial situation—" There it was. Without my income and the joint checking account, they were struggling to maintain the lifestyle they'd built on my earnings. Michael's construction business was notoriously unreliable, feast or famine depending on the season and the economy. Emily was on maternity leave, so her income was reduced. They needed my money, and they were finally desperate enough to admit it. "Where do you want to meet?" I asked. "The house. Your house. Our house. Tonight, if possible." I looked around my studio apartment, at the life I'd begun building for myself. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the distance I'd fought so hard to create, but another part of me, the part that had been reading Margaret Santos's legal documents and contemplating the possibility of reclaiming my home, was curious to see how this would play out. "Fine," I said. 8 o'clock. The drive to Maple Street felt like traveling back in time. Everything looked exactly the same. The neat suburban lawns, the modest houses with their attached garages, the sidewalks where I'd walked every evening after dinner for over 20 years. But I felt like a different person returning to a life that no longer fit. Michael's truck and Emily's car were both in the driveway, just as they'd been the last time I'd driven past. But this time, I was going inside. This time, I was walking back into the life I'd fled, armed with knowledge and determination instead of shock and betrayal. Michael answered the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me through the front window. He looked terrible, thinner than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and gray stubble that suggested he'd been skipping his morning shaves. The construction work had always kept him in relatively good shape, but he looked older now, worn down by something more than physical labor. "Diane," he said, and for a moment, his relief looked genuine. "Thank you for coming." I stepped inside without responding, and the familiar smell of the house hit me like a wave. The lavender air freshener I'd always used, mixed with something new and less pleasant. Baby formula, dirty diapers, the staleness of people who'd been living in crisis mode for too long. The living room looked different. My carefully arranged furniture had been rearranged to accommodate a playpen, a baby swing, and scattered toys. The coffee table I'd refinished myself was covered with burp cloths and baby bottles. Everything looked slightly grimy, as if housekeeping had taken a back seat to more pressing concerns. Emily was sitting on the couch, holding the baby. She looked up when I entered, and I was shocked by the change in her appearance. She'd always been pretty, with my blonde hair and Michael's blue eyes. But now she looked haggard. Her hair was lank and unwashed, her face pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "I'm so glad you came." I remained standing, refusing to make myself comfortable in my own home. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Michael gestured toward the armchair, my armchair, where I'd read countless books and paid countless bills over the years. "Please sit down." "I'm fine standing." Emily shifted the baby in her arms, and I caught a glimpse of his face. He was bigger than he'd been 3 weeks ago, more alert, with features that were unmistakably Michael's. Looking at him should have triggered some maternal instinct, some grandmother's love that transcended the circumstances of his birth. Instead, I felt nothing but a hollow sadness for this innocent child who'd been born into such a mess. "Mom," Emily began, tears already spilling down her cheeks, "I owe you an apology. What we did, there's no excuse for it." "You're right," I said simply. "There isn't." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Clearly, she'd expected forgiveness to come easier, had counted on my maternal instincts to override my sense of self-preservation. "But I want you to understand," she continued. "It wasn't planned. I was so broken after the divorce, so lost. And Michael was there for me in ways that David never was. He listened to me, supported me, made me feel valued." "Stop." The word came out sharp and final. "Do not make this about your emotional needs. Do not try to justify betraying me by claiming you were broken." "But I was broken, Mom. I needed—" "What you needed," I interrupted, "was therapy. What you needed was time to heal from your divorce. What you needed was support from your family. What you didn't need was to seduce your stepfather." Emily's face crumpled completely then, and she began sobbing, ugly, desperate tears that shook her whole body. The baby started crying too, a thin wail that cut through the tension in the room. Michael moved to comfort Emily, putting his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that would have looked paternal if I didn't know better. The casual intimacy of the movement, the way she leaned into him, made my stomach turn. "Diane," Michael said, his voice gentle but firm, "I know you're angry, but Emily's been through enough. She's struggling with postpartum depression, the baby's been colicky, and your absence has been hard on everyone." My absence. As if I'd gone on vacation instead of fleeing their betrayal. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I am not responsible for Emily's mental health. I am not responsible for your financial problems. I am not responsible for fixing the mess you created when you decided to destroy our family." "We didn't destroy anything," Michael said, his own temper starting to show. "We made mistakes, yes, but families work through mistakes. Families forgive each other. Families don't sleep with each other's spouses," I shot back. "Families don't lie and manipulate and gaslight each other into accepting the unacceptable." "So what do you want?" Emily asked through her tears. "Do you want us to disappear? Do you want to pretend your grandson doesn't exist? Do you want to throw away 42 years of marriage and 24 years of being my mother?" I said carefully, "for you both to get out of my house." The silence that followed was profound. Even the baby stopped crying, as if sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. "Your house?" Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. "My house. Bought with my inheritance, maintained with my income, my name on the deed. My house. Both our names are on the deed," Michael said. "My lawyer seems to think I have a very strong case for sole ownership, given the circumstances." I pulled a folded paper from my purse, the divorce petition Margaret had prepared. "Especially when the judge learns about your affair and the child you had with my daughter." I set the papers on the coffee table, next to the baby bottles and burp cloths. "You're being served," Emily gasped, staring at the papers as if they were a snake that might bite her. Michael's face went through several color changes before settling on a dangerous shade of red. "You can't do this," he said. "I can, and I am. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Diane, be reasonable. Emily has a newborn. She can't just—" She should have thought about that before she decided to have an affair with her stepfather. Michael stood up, and for a moment, I thought he might try to physically intimidate me. Instead, he began pacing, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I'd seen thousands of times before. "Fine," he said finally. "You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. You think you can just throw us out and take everything? I'll fight you for every penny, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall. I'll make this divorce so ugly, so public, so expensive that you'll wish you'd never started it." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "I have nothing left to lose. You've already taken everything that mattered to me." Emily looked up from her tears, hope flickering in her eyes. "Does that mean, could you ever forgive us? Could we ever be a family again?" I looked at her, this woman who used to be my daughter, holding a baby who might have been my grandson in a different universe, and felt something inside my chest finally, completely break free. "No," I said simply. "We can never be a family again, because family means trust and loyalty and love that doesn't come with conditions. And you destroyed all of that when you chose each other over me." I turned toward the door, then paused and looked back one more time. "I hope you're happy together," I said. "I really do, because it cost you everything to get what you wanted. I hope it was worth it." And with that, I walked out of my house, soon to be my house again, and drove back to my new life, leaving them to figure out their own future without me. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my house, as the divorce decree now officially confirmed, making coffee in the early morning light, when I realized I was humming. It was a small thing, insignificant to anyone else, but it stopped me cold. I couldn't remember the last time I'd hummed while doing ordinary tasks. Probably sometime before Michael and Emily's betrayal, back when I still believed that contentment was my natural state, rather than a privilege that could be revoked without warning. The kitchen looked different now. I'd repainted it a warm sage green instead of the yellow Michael had always preferred. I'd replaced the gingham curtains with simple white panels that let in more light. The refrigerator was covered with postcards from places I'd never been but was planning to visit: Italy, Ireland, the coast of Maine. Small changes, but they added up to something larger, a space that felt like mine. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks earlier. Margaret Santos had been right about my chances. The combination of my financial contributions to the house, Michael's adultery, and his inability to match my legal resources had resulted in a settlement that heavily favored me. I kept the house, the majority of our savings, and my pension. Michael kept his truck, his tools, and the responsibility for the child he'd fathered with my daughter. Emily had tried to contact me several times during the proceedings, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as it became clear that I wasn't going to change my mind. The last message, left just before the final court date, had been particularly hard to listen to. "Mom, please, I know you hate me, but I need you to know that Tyler asks about you every day. He doesn't understand why Grandma Diane doesn't come to his baseball games anymore. He thinks he did something wrong. Please, if you won't forgive me, at least don't punish him for my mistakes. Tyler, my sweet grandson, the innocent victim in all of this." The guilt over cutting him out of my life was the one part of my decision that still caused me physical pain. But I'd learned, through months of therapy with Dr. Rebecca Chen, no relation to Patricia from the bank, that guilt imposed by manipulative people wasn't the same as legitimate moral obligation. You can't sacrifice your peace of mind to maintain a relationship that requires you to accept abuse, Dr. Chen had said during one of our sessions. That's not love. That's codependency. It had taken me months to understand the difference. The doorbell rang, interrupting my morning reverie. Through the window, I could see a small, elderly woman standing on my front porch, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. I opened the door to find my neighbor, Janet Walsh, smiling at me with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with genuine affection. "Good morning, dear," she said. "I made too much tuna casserole again, and I thought you might like some." It was a gentle fiction we'd developed over the past few months. Janet never actually made too much of anything. She cooked single portions with the precision of someone who'd been living alone for 15 years. But she'd taken it upon herself to check on me regularly, and food was her preferred method of expressing care. "Come in," I said, accepting the dish. I was just making coffee. Janet had become more than a neighbor in the months since my world had imploded. She'd become my friend, my sounding board, and occasionally, my lifeline during the darkest moments of the divorce proceedings. She was the one who'd encouraged me to join the book club at the library. She was the one who'd suggested I take the watercolor painting class at the community center. She was the one who'd sat with me the night the divorce was finalized, not saying much, just being present while I processed the strange mix of grief and relief that came with the official end of my marriage. "How are you feeling about the trip?" she asked, settling into one of my kitchen chairs with the careful movements of someone whose joints had earned their aches through decades of faithful service. The trip. In 2 weeks, I was leaving for Ireland, a solo vacation that would have been unthinkable a year ago. I'd never traveled alone, never been out of the country without Michael, never made a major decision without consulting someone else first. But Dr. Chen had challenged me to do something purely for myself, something that served no purpose other than my own joy. Terrified, I admitted, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. And excited, and terrified again. Janet laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a gentle breeze. "That sounds exactly right. The best adventures always start with terror." She was right, of course. Everything worthwhile I'd done in the past 6 months had started with terror. Hiring Margaret Santos, confronting Michael and Emily, filing for divorce, moving back into my own house and making it truly mine for the first time in decades, starting therapy, joining the book club, taking the painting class where I'd discovered a talent I never knew I possessed. "I keep thinking about what my mother wrote in that letter," I said, settling across from Janet at the table where I'd once served countless meals to a family that had taken my service for granted, about holding on to myself. "I think I'm finally learning what that means." "Tell me," Janet said, and it wasn't idle curiosity. In our months of friendship, she'd become genuinely invested in my journey of self-discovery. "It means that I don't have to earn love through service," I said slowly, working out the thoughts as I spoke them. "It means that my worth isn't determined by how useful I am to other people. It means that I can choose kindness without choosing martyrdom." The words felt foreign in my mouth, but true. Foreign because I'd spent 67 years believing the opposite. And true because every day of living independently had proven their validity. "You know," Janet said thoughtfully, "when I lost Henry 15 years ago, I thought my life was over. I'd been married for 43 years, and I didn't know who I was without him. But I learned something important. Sometimes you have to lose who you thought you were to discover who you actually are." I'd heard Janet mention her late husband before, but she'd never spoken about the grief of losing him. I realized I'd been so focused on my own pain that I'd never asked about hers. "Do you miss him?" I asked. "Every day," she said simply. "But I don't miss the woman I was when I was married to him. I love her for getting me through those years. But I like the woman I became after he was gone much better." It was exactly what I needed to hear. The idea that I could honor the woman I'd been while embracing the woman I was becoming felt revolutionary. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. Tyler's name appeared on the screen, and my heart did the familiar dance of love and pain that happened every time I saw his contact information. I'd made the difficult decision to maintain some relationship with Tyler, separate from his mother. It meant careful coordination, picking him up from school sometimes, taking him for ice cream, attending the occasional baseball game when I could be sure Emily wouldn't be there. It wasn't ideal, and it required me to compartmentalize my feelings in ways that were emotionally exhausting, but Tyler was innocent in all of this, and I couldn't bring myself to punish him for his mother's choices. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered. "Grandma Diane." His voice was bright with excitement. "Guess what? I got an A on my science project, the one about volcanoes." "That's wonderful, Tyler. I'm so proud of you. Can you come to the science fair next Friday? All the projects will be on display, and I want to show you mine." I glanced at Janet, who was politely pretending not to listen while clearly following every word of the conversation. "I'll have to check my schedule, honey, but I'll try my best." "Mom said you probably wouldn't come because you're still mad at her," Tyler said, and the careful way he said it told me that Emily had coached him to include that particular detail. Even now, even after everything, Emily was trying to use Tyler to manipulate me. The realization should have made me angry, but instead, I felt something closer to pity. She was so desperate to maintain some connection to me that she was willing to involve her 8-year-old son in her emotional manipulation. "Tyler," I said gently, "my feelings about your mom have nothing to do with my feelings about you. I love you just as much as I always have. Then why can't you just forgive her?" he asked. And the question was so innocent, so achingly hopeful, that it nearly broke my heart. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive? How do you tell a child that love doesn't always conquer all? That sometimes self-preservation has to come before family harmony? "Some things are complicated, sweetheart," I said finally. "But what's not complicated is how much I love you." After Tyler hung up, promising to text me the details about the science fair, I sat with Janet in comfortable silence for several minutes. "That must be difficult," she said eventually. "It is, but it's also worth it. He didn't choose any of this." "Neither did you," Janet pointed out gently. "No, but I'm choosing what comes next." And that was the truth that had taken me months to accept. I couldn't control what Michael and Emily had done to me, but I could control how I responded. I could choose bitterness, or I could choose healing. I could choose isolation, or I could choose connection with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. After Janet left, I spent the afternoon in my garden, pulling weeds and planting fall bulbs that would bloom next spring. It was work I'd always enjoyed, but now it felt symbolic as well as practical. I was literally and figuratively planting seeds for a future I was creating entirely for myself. The sun was setting when I finally went inside, dirty and tired and more content than I'd been in years. I made myself a simple dinner, pasta with the fresh basil I'd grown myself, paired with a glass of wine that I'd chosen because I liked it, not because it was on sale or because someone else preferred it. As I ate, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. She'd been so focused on holding her family together that she'd forgotten to hold on to herself. She'd been so afraid of being alone that she'd accepted treatment that no one should have to accept. She'd been so committed to being needed that she'd lost sight of the difference between being needed and being used. I didn't hate that woman. She'd done the best she could with the information she had at the time, but I didn't want to be her anymore. The woman I was becoming was someone I was genuinely excited to get to know. She read books for pleasure. She painted watercolors that would never win awards, but brought her joy. She planned trips to places she'd always wanted to see. She made friends based on mutual respect, rather than shared obligation. She said no when she meant no, and yes when she meant yes. She was learning, slowly but surely, what it meant to hold on to herself. That night, as I prepared for bed in the master bedroom that was finally, truly mine, I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. Not the practiced smile I'd worn for 42 years of marriage, designed to smooth over tensions and keep others comfortable. This was something different. A smile of recognition, of approval, of quiet pride in the woman looking back at me. Tomorrow I would continue the work of building a life that belonged entirely to me. I would finish planning my trip to Ireland, where I would see landscapes I'd only dreamed of and sleep in beds I'd chosen for myself. I would attend Tyler's science fair and cheer for his volcano project, with the uncomplicated joy of a grandmother who loved him without conditions. I would have dinner with Janet and perhaps invite the new woman from my book club, Sarah, who'd recently moved to Chicago from Portland and was looking for friends. I would continue becoming who I was always meant to be, before I learned to define myself through other people's needs. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely excited about my future. Not because someone else had planned it for me, not because it served anyone else's interests, but because it was mine, and that made all the difference. 2 years later, I was sitting on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink that no photograph could ever capture. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and I pulled my new wool coat, a deep burgundy that brought out the highlights in my silver hair, closer around my shoulders. Silver hair. I'd stopped coloring it 6 months ago, another small act of rebellion against the woman I used to be, the woman who'd spent decades trying to freeze time, to maintain the appearance of youth that she thought made her more valuable to the people around her. Now, at 69, I wore my silver like a crown, each strand earned through surviving betrayals that would have destroyed a weaker woman. In my lap sat a postcard from Tyler, now 10 years old and full of questions about the world. The front showed a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge, and his careful handwriting on the back read, "Dear Grandma Diane, we went to San Francisco for Mom's wedding. I thought you'd like this picture because you collect postcards now. Love, Tyler. P.S. I still miss you. Emily's wedding. To a man named Richard whom I'd never met and likely never would." According to Tyler's occasional updates, Richard was kind to him, worked in finance, and seemed to make Emily happy. I felt nothing about this information beyond a distant hope that perhaps Emily had finally found the stability she'd been seeking when she destroyed our family. Michael had apparently moved to Florida with the baby, now a toddler whose name I made a point of not remembering. Occasionally, Janet would mention seeing Emily at the grocery store, looking tired but managing, working part-time while Richard helped support her and Tyler. These updates were offered carefully, with Janet watching my face for signs of pain or anger. But mostly I felt nothing. They'd become characters in someone else's story, people I'd once known intimately who now existed in a parallel universe that no longer intersected with mine. The bench where I sat had become part of my morning routine during the warmer months. I'd arrive with my coffee and whatever book I was reading. Today it was Educated by Tara Westover, a memoir about family dysfunction and self-discovery that resonated in ways I couldn't have predicted 2 years ago, and spend an hour watching the lake change with the light. This morning was different, though. Today marked exactly 2 years since I'd walked out of that house for the last time. 2 years since I'd chosen myself over the familiar comfort of martyrdom. It felt like an anniversary worth acknowledging, not with sadness for what I'd lost, but with gratitude for what I'd gained. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my friend from book club who'd become something like a sister to me over the past year and a half. "Coffee this afternoon? I have news." Sarah's news was usually either about her grown children visiting from Portland or some adventure she was planning. At 72, she had more energy than women half her age, and she'd become my partner in the kind of spontaneous activities I'd never allowed myself during my marriage. Last month, we'd driven to Wisconsin to see the fall colors. Next month, we were planning a weekend in New York to see Broadway shows and eat at restaurants whose names we couldn't pronounce. Another text, this one from Janet. "Dinner tonight? I'm making that chicken recipe you liked." A third message, from my painting instructor Marcus. "Don't forget about the art show next Friday. Your landscape series needs to be there by Thursday." An art show. 6 months ago, Marcus had convinced me to submit 3 of my watercolor paintings to a local exhibition featuring amateur artists. The idea had terrified me. Putting my work on display for strangers to judge felt impossibly vulnerable. But the woman I'd become understood that vulnerability and courage often walked hand in hand. The paintings were landscapes from my travels. The cliffs of Ireland from my first solo trip, the lavender fields of Provence from last summer's adventure, and the mountains of Vermont from a weekend getaway with Sarah. Each canvas captured not just the scenery, but my own sense of wonder at being free to chase beauty wherever it led me. I thought about the woman who'd discovered her husband and daughter's betrayal in that Chicago living room 2 years ago. She'd been so broken, so convinced that her life was over, that her worth had been determined entirely by other people's needs and opinions. She couldn't have imagined sitting by a lake at sunrise, surrounded by friendships she'd chosen rather than inherited, planning art exhibitions and weekend getaways and quiet dinners with people who valued her company rather than her service. The sun climbed higher, turning the lake from gold to brilliant blue, and I opened my book to the passage I'd marked the night before. "You can love someone and still choose to say goodbye to them forever." The words had hit me like lightning when I'd first read them, perfectly capturing the complex truth about Emily and Michael. I did love them, in the way you love people who've shared your history and shaped your story. But love didn't require me to accept abuse. Love didn't demand that I sacrifice my dignity for their comfort. A jogger passed by, nodding politely as she continued her morning run. A man walking his dog stopped to let the golden retriever sniff around the base of my bench. Normal people living normal lives, pursuing their own happiness without apology. For most of my adult life, I'd watched other people live while I managed the logistics of their living. Now I was one of them, a participant rather than a spectator. My phone rang, and Tyler's name appeared on the screen. Our weekly calls had become one of my favorite rituals, a way to maintain our connection without the complications that came with family gatherings or shared holidays. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered. "Grandma Diane, are you sitting by the lake?" He'd become fascinated by my morning routine, probably because it was so different from the structured, obligation-filled life he remembered me living when I was still part of his daily world. "I am." "How did you know?" "Because it's Thursday morning, and you always sit by the lake on Thursday mornings. I wish I could see it." "Maybe someday you can," I said, and meant it. Tyler was growing up, becoming more capable of understanding complex emotions and situations. Eventually, he might be old enough to visit me independently, to have a relationship with me that didn't require navigating the minefield of his mother's guilt and manipulation. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever miss the way things used to be? When we all lived together and had Sunday dinners and stuff?" The question was achingly innocent, but I could hear Emily's influence in it. The nostalgic framing, the emphasis on family traditions, the subtle implication that I'd chosen to abandon something precious rather than escape something toxic. "I miss you," I said honestly. "I miss being able to see you whenever I wanted. But Tyler, I need you to understand something important. Sometimes people have to make very difficult choices to protect themselves. And sometimes those choices look selfish to other people, but they're actually necessary for survival. Like when animals leave their families to find their own territory?" The comparison was so unexpected and so apt that I laughed out loud. "Exactly like that. Mom says you didn't have to leave. She says families should forgive each other no matter what." There it was. Emily's ongoing campaign to reframe the narrative, to position herself as the wronged party seeking reconciliation, rather than the person whose choices had destroyed our family. "Tyler," I said gently, "your mom is entitled to her opinion, but I want you to remember something. Forgiveness doesn't always mean going back to the way things were. Sometimes forgiveness means wishing someone well from a distance while protecting yourself from being hurt again. That's confusing. I know it is. But when you're older, you'll understand that love and safety don't always come from the same places." After Tyler hung up, I sat with the weight of that conversation. The hardest part of choosing myself had been accepting that some relationships couldn't be salvaged, no matter how much history they carried. Emily would always be my biological daughter, but she'd forfeited the right to be my family when she'd chosen betrayal over loyalty. I thought about the women in my book club, who'd become more of a family to me than the people who shared my DNA. Sarah, with her irreverent humor and fierce loyalty to her friends. Margaret, the retired teacher who'd survived her own divorce and understood the particular pain of starting over in your 60s. Linda, the widow who'd channeled her grief into volunteer work and had taught me that helping others could be an act of self-care rather than self-sacrifice, as long as you chose when and how to give. These women had earned their place in my life through consistency, respect, and genuine affection. They'd never asked me to compromise my dignity or accept unacceptable behavior for the sake of keeping the peace. They'd celebrated my victories without feeling diminished by them, supported me through struggles without demanding anything in return. The sun was fully up now, and the lake had settled into its mid-morning rhythm of gentle waves and distant sailboats. I closed my book, finished my coffee, and stood to begin the walk back to my car. Tonight, I would have dinner with Janet, probably while she pretended to cook too much food again. Tomorrow, I would finish framing my paintings for the art show. This weekend, Sarah and I were driving to Milwaukee to visit a museum neither of us had seen before. Next month, I was flying to Seattle to visit Marcus's daughter, who'd invited me after seeing my Ireland photographs and declaring that anyone who could capture light like that needed to see the Pacific Northwest. Small plans, personal plans, adventures chosen for joy rather than obligation. This was what freedom looked like. Not dramatic gestures or grand pronouncements, but the quiet accumulation of days lived authentically, choices made from love rather than fear. As I walked back toward my car, I passed a young woman sitting on another bench, crying into her phone. Her words drifted toward me on the morning breeze. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending it's okay when it's not." I paused, recognizing something familiar in her voice. the desperate edge of someone who was beginning to understand that love shouldn't hurt, that family shouldn't feel like a prison, that sometimes the people closest to you were the ones most capable of destroying you. For a moment, I considered approaching her, offering the kind of validation and support that Janet had given me 2 years ago. But then, I remembered one of the most important lessons I'd learned. You can't save someone who isn't ready to save themselves. Instead, I sent up a silent prayer that she would find the strength to choose herself, that she would learn what I'd learned, that you can survive the loss of everything you thought you needed and discover that what you actually needed was inside you all along. The drive home took me through the neighborhood where I'd once lived with Michael and Emily. I'd stopped avoiding those streets months ago, had stopped feeling the sharp pain of memory when I passed familiar landmarks. Now the house where I'd spent 20 years was just another building, inhabited by strangers who'd painted the front door blue and planted different flowers in the beds I'd once tended. Sometimes healing looked like avoiding the source of pain. Sometimes it looked like being able to drive past it without flinching. At home, I made myself lunch and settled into my reading chair. A new purchase, chosen for comfort rather than how it looked with the rest of the furniture. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, empty of obligations, full of possibilities. I could paint, or read, or call one of my friends, or simply sit in the garden I'd replanted with flowers I actually liked. The freedom to choose was still intoxicating, even after 2 years of practice. My mother's letter, framed now and hanging in my hallway, caught my eye as I moved through the house. Hold on to yourself, Diane, even if no one else does. She'd been gone for 17 years, but her words had become my North Star, guiding me through the darkest period of my life and into the light on the other side. I thought she would be proud of the woman I'd become. I thought she would approve of the life I'd built from the ashes of the life that had been taken from me. Most importantly, I was proud of myself. I was proud of the courage it had taken to walk away from everything familiar. I was proud of the strength it had taken to rebuild from nothing. I was proud of the wisdom it had taken to choose peace over drama, authenticity over acceptance. The woman who'd once defined herself entirely through her relationships had learned to be complete on her own. The woman who'd once believed that sacrifice was the highest form of love had learned that self-respect was actually the foundation of all healthy relationships. The woman who'd once feared being alone had discovered the profound joy of being truly, completely herself. As the sun set that evening, painting my windows in shades of orange and pink, I raised a glass of wine to the window in a private toast. To survival, to rebirth, to the understanding that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, better one. To the unshakable knowledge that I am enough, exactly as I am, all by myself. And to everyone who has ever felt discarded, forgotten, or invisible, your story isn't over. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. Your comeback is waiting for you to claim it. Sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as the deepest losses. Sometimes the people who leave you teach you exactly how strong you really are. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life like I did? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your story, whatever it is, matters, and you deserve to be the hero of it, not the supporting character in someone else's drama.